and thank you for having me. Yes, first of all, I'm pretty excited about being here. And the reason why I'm excited is because this tool is much more than a tool. And actually, I don't really like talking about it as a tool, because as soon as you do that, you have positioned yourself for a ton of pitfalls already. My name is Jakob, as Jesper said, and what I do in my daily work is that I help grow leaders to create meaningful impact in their businesses. And one thing is working with OKRs, but another thing, and perhaps even more important thing, which might also even be a precursor to OKRs, is working with mindsets and behaviors. Because if we are not thinking and acting in the right way, the best tools in the world are not going to help us much. And so once you start figuring out what you want to do, you can start focusing on how to get there. But actually, even that is a difficult thing in itself. Many of us go around and we run businesses and we're leaders, or we work in teams, or so on and so forth. But when we really push people on the stomach, sometimes, or actually quite often, it becomes really difficult to carve out what is it that really matters in what we're doing. When we start looking at it, we suddenly realize that there's a lot of projects going on, there's a lot of priorities, but there's not an actual real alignment around what really matters. And there's also sometimes not even a real understanding about what really matters. And so the OKR as a tool is a way to start honing in on what really matters. And that's why I use it in the work that I do. I want to just talk a little bit about the story of where OKRs come from and how they've come to be what they are today, what this tool is. OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. How many have experience with OKRs already? Okay, so some people here. It's good. We need to learn from all your expertise during the evening. I hope you're ready to share. Yeah? OKRs stands for Objectives and Key Results. Objectives is a way of working with goals. And the old management guru, he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And now I forgot his name. Who can help me? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Drucker, exactly. So Drucker was the guy who invented working with objectives and focused a lot on that. And it was... And then one of the key leaders in Intel, his name was Andy Grove. He took that and he developed it. And he developed it because if you have an objective, but you have no way of really figuring out whether or not you reached it or not, it's difficult to work with it. So he added this element of key results, where the objectives are the more aspirational version of what we are trying to achieve, and the key results are the more measurable piece of it. But before we dive more into theory and what OKRs really are, it's actually more important to understand where they came from. Andy Grove was not the founder, but he was one of the key drivers, and later the CEO, and even later the chief board member of Intel. And he's a unique person. He wrote this book called, I'm completely out of words this evening. He wrote a book on management, which is kind of like one of the core Bibles among business people in Silicon Valley. And for this book, he needed to take a photograph. And especially back in the 80s, when you took a photo for a book, you looked like really snappy and like super tight suit and everything. But Andy was more like, let's focus on what matters. I just need a photo from a book. If the book can't sell itself on the content, well, then perhaps people shouldn't buy it. And so he was like, just got up there, had a photo taken with his key card, and just like owned the content of the book. And the focus on the picture like that, I got that from a guy called Ben Horowitz, which is one of the key investors in Silicon Valley today, who praised like this whole philosophy that Andy Grove was preaching. And what is important to understand here is actually Andy Grove, he didn't only talk about these things, he didn't just lead from the top, he was it. He was everything that he was preaching. And one of the things that he was preaching beyond being able to focus on what matters was that the leader should take a teacher's role, like a role where the leader stands in front of like what is the right behavior and make sure that it is massaged into the organization. We're going to talk more about it, but remember it because it's a very key component of how you make these things work. Then later on, Andy Grove had an employee called John Doerr, and John Doerr was absolutely fascinated with this way of working, this way of thinking. And so John Doerr, after many years after he left Intel, he took this work of OKRs that he had learned there and started to teach it to other companies. And John Doerr has been doing business for many years. He was in Intel for many years, and actually so many years that you can see the forward on the bottom there is Larry Page, one of the founders of Google. And so John was actually talking to the Google guys all the way back in the garage days. And if you read the book, Measure What Matters, he gives this example, this story of how he was actually in the garage with them, and he had like these laminates, I can't remember, someone who's a little bit older than me perhaps help me, but where you kind of screen the presentation of, what is it called in English? You know? Overhead, exactly. So he brought his overheads and he was like explaining how OKRs work, and they just bought completely into it. And just for the record, back then he was asking how much they thought this company could be worth when they were in the garage back at the time, and he was like, they're probably gonna say, if they're really crazy, they're gonna say about $1 billion. And then they said $10 billion. Imagine that kind of thinking, that kind of ambitiousness from two guys already back then. It's like, we're going to make a $10 billion business. So he was excited to bring this work into Google, and they actually brought OKRs in as a way of working and thinking already from the beginning. And so when you search the internet and you're trying to find out how to do it, what you'll probably pop into also is the Google playbook on OKRs, because they are some of the guys who kind of written the most down around how to do it, and at least made it public. But enough talk. Tonight is also about you doing some work. So I'm going to hand these out. And we didn't want to kill the forest completely, so there is about one for every two people. So now I just need to see what. Turn to this page, how you write effective OKRs. And then just read and talk about the left side, objectives. What is an objective? So read it together and then raise your hand when you and then talk a little bit about what is it. Once you've had that conversation, just raise your hands so I know that everybody's done. Okay. You can continue the conversation in a minute, but just to have something to actually work with this evening. It's still January, so you can still set New Year's resolutions. For the year, right? You still have 11 months to achieve it. So what's my objective for the year? Write down an objective. What would you like to achieve for the next year? So if you're a leader, you can think about it as your team or your department. If you don't have a team and a department, you can think about it for yourself within the team or at home, anything. I don't want to put any restrictions on you. Just think about something that you dream about achieving that would just be damn amazing if I achieved it this year. And then look in the description on how to formulate such an objective. Yeah? So make sure that it expresses what you want to do. What's the actual intent? Make sure that it's aggressive yet realistic. That's a quite important one. It needs to feel a little stretchy, but it also needs to feel like you can grasp it. Make sure that it's tangible and objective and unambiguous. What that means is that make sure that you can see it so that it creates, it's a little bit like a vision. Make sure that it creates some kind of image within your head when you're thinking about it. Make sure that once you have achieved it, it has contributed value to your business or to your life. And make sure that you have written it in a way that actually inspires you. You want to be able to tell it to yourself and to other people, and they go like, wow, that sounds pretty cool. And it's not necessarily the thing you just say. It's not like running a marathon. Perhaps there's a certain way you want to run the marathon. How do you want to look when you run the marathon? Right? I want to look really amazing. I want to inspire other people while I'm running it. Who knows, right? So try and write down an objective that you can work with for the rest of the evening. You can work in pairs, but you can also start by yourself. Perhaps some people need a little bit of thinking time. Okay. If you've written it down, have your partner just quickly check if they would be able to, just from reading it, explain it to some third party. Yeah? So see if your partner can read it and they feel comfortable with explaining to someone that don't know you. So let's just, I just want to hear a few, because now we've been talking a little bit. You have a sense about what OKRs are if you didn't when you came. So what would you like to get out of this evening tonight? You might have come with some kind of idea about it. So I would just love to get a few inputs on that.
Yeah, I hope I can get some concrete examples on how you have worked with breaking down the key results into something measurable.
Yes.
Because I've seen in my organization people are working with OKRs, but they forget the measurable part.
Yeah.
So they just...
Yes, working with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good input. Yeah.
So I've been introduced to this by my boss last year, and I would simply like a second view, to get a broader perspective.
Yes.
On this, so.
Yes. Okay. Great. Yeah.
I believe it sounds deceivingly simple.
Yes.
So where are the catches?
Everywhere.
How can you start working with it? Yeah.
Okay, but a very good point. Yeah, and keep asking detailed questions on that note, because it is extremely deceivably simple, and it is immeasurably hard. And these two guys that I'll present in a second will vouch for it. Yeah.
I would like to get more inspiration on how to get OKRs being what they are and not just a new version of KPIs.
Good point. Yeah, very important.
Yeah, I was going to say more or less the same, like the fine line between KPIs and OKRs.
Yes. Okay, great. So I will talk about that. The only thing I will say is some of the answers you'll get just by the conversation that we're having. And on the more details, I'll also talk briefly about it in the end, but remind me, because it's not specifically on the agenda. And otherwise we can have a chat about it afterwards, because it's a little bit more in the details of it, unless like the entire group really wants that bit. Is that a big theme, KPIs versus OKRs?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure to talk about it. Yeah.
You can say we have done this for 20 years, right?
Yes.
So what's the difference?
Between OKRs and KPIs?
No, you can say the whole idea of setting goals and
right.
So what's the difference?
Right.
What are we having here?
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
And I would also be mega happy if coincidentally brought up scaling OKRs into bigger corporations.
Yeah.
Like several levels.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Advanced students on the back. Yes.
I would like to hear something about when we have a business strategy, how do we use OKRs to make things more tangible so we can actually prioritize and so on? Yeah,
great example as well. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that actually. It's a version of it in the case that we're having. Yeah, great. Any other input? Okay, so obviously I have an agenda. I'll try to hit the points that you guys have said, and please just keep asking to bring it up along if you feel like it's being missed, okay? Because I'll try to remember everything, but I won't say I have the greatest memory in doing both, making sure we go through everything that I've planned and hitting all the things I just heard. So just shout out. Okay, good to get that input. So just a few comments on how it was to write objectives. Easy, difficult, tough. What was tough? What was easy?
Tough making it tangible and inspirational, especially. And I'm still not there. It's not at all inspirational.
Yes. What else? Other comments? Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to introduce these two gentlemen that sit up here. Just come up. So Stefan and Jacob are taking a lead in the implementation of OKRs in the digital lab at DSB, where we've been working for the past 3-4 months or something like that, 5 months. And they're going to jump in and give input at the end of, I'm going to present the case now and talk about how we did it and how we worked with it. And then they're going to jump in and give some context and perspective in the end. And then we also have made time for Q&A specifically where you can ask them questions in the end. So they're here just so you know it. Thanks, guys. So I connected with Clarissa, who is the head of digital at DSB and leader of the DSB Digital Labs. And I did this, we started the conversation back at the summer holiday last year. And I came in and did a piece of work with the team on how to have crucial conversations, which is actually an amazing precursor to doing this work. Because when you create boundaries, you also create conflicts. And being able to work effectively with OKRs is actually the same as being able to effectively manage conflicts. Or at least getting what you want out of OKRs, it is required that you can deal effectively with conflicts. Because otherwise, you're just going to take the energy out of the system that you're trying to create. I'm going to tap more into that. And the precursor then was that the DSB Digital Lab was created about 3 years ago. And it was this idea that Clarissa brought forth that she wanted to make sure that she could infuse some innovation into DSB. And so she first, it was a whole conversation about how to prototype the lab. What kind of lab do we want to be? Then the lab was formed and great results was created through the first couple of years. But perhaps there were also some of those creations that were low-hanging fruits, the value that was being added. And so when I had this conversation with Clarissa, she was like, you have money to make things happen, right? You have created some really cool results that have justified why you exist. But now she was like, but I want to create more radical innovation now. And I also want to create a sense of urgency within my organization where we can establish a culture that can actually carry a 10x kind of thinking and mindset that we can infuse our way of working with. And even though we've been talking about this for a while, it's not really happening to the extent I want it to happen. So what do we do? And so what I first did was we started to look at, so what is your sense about right now where you want to go? As a digital lab, you have ambitions, you have a drawing board with some pointers that you're operating against, but you don't have a strategy as such, like a traditional strategy. You have something else, which is a vision, which kind of needs to create a clear picture that can draw us into the future and support us in making wise decisions on where we should focus next. And we looked at the vision then, and then I was teasing Clarissa a little bit because the vision was kind of vague in a way. I can't remember it by heart. Can you remember what it is by heart?
No, we have a new one.
You have a new one, but do you remember it for the sake of the example?
Something about daring to think 10x in everything we do.
Yeah.
As a precursor in everything we do.
Yeah, daring to think 10x as a precursor in everything we do. which is...
Is 10x 10 times?
Yes.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you for asking. So that sounds inspirational, right? But does it really help us in making decisions and guiding us in focusing on what we should be doing? I was like, perhaps not quite. So we started by doing a trip with these two gentlemen and Clarissa into, we did an excursion for 2 days where we worked with honing in on what is a powerful vision that can create an image that helps us set powerful goals. And as a precursor to that, I did some work on mindsets and behaviors. So we did a trip in November, and we started out talking about what are the mindsets and behaviors that are driving us. Every time I go into an organization, they ask, do we really need to spend time on this? And then I say, yes. And then they say, okay, fair enough, you decide, but they don't really get it. But some of the things that we talk about here is we talk about stuff like the comfort zone that people know. We talk about adult development. We talk about fear and all sorts of things. And these things become frames and precursors for the conversations that are difficult to have later on. Without creating this foundation, it becomes very difficult to have powerful conversations later on when it becomes difficult. So we talked about mindsets and behaviors. Then we talked about the vision. And then we talked about yearly OKRs. And obviously, as a part of this, we talked about what are OKRs and so on and so forth. If you go to page 2, perhaps. This one, right? Here's the vision that we ended up creating. So we unleashed DSB's innovative potential. This headline was tightly connected to the strategy of DSB and to the visionary work that has been created within DSB very recently. So we made sure that it was tied into that. We created a process where there was a tight connection between what is the purpose that DSB is trying to serve their customers, and how are we needing to serve DSB as a part of that. So we started there, and then we asked, like, how are we going to do that? And then we tried to create something that was visual and tangible in the vision around it. So through digital products and services, leading DSB towards a sustainable future. There's a lot about sustainability in DSB's new strategy. By making the impossible possible through activation of data across the entire organization. That's one of the levers that we've decided that are important to work with. It's one of the ways that we can create high value for DSB is by activating this kind of data. And then by fostering world-class innovation, culture, mindset, and behavior. So that was a good, difficult piece of work, and we formulated the objectives on a yearly level for the lab, and halfway made our way through the key results. And then you guys continue with working with the key results for the coming months. I came in and supported once in a while. And then just before Christmas, we had a 2-hour session, 3-hour session, something like that. I think a 3-hour session on OKRs with the team. Just as a, what is it? And trying it out a little bit. And communicating a little bit about what is it that we're going to do now, why are we even talking about this, it's a new way of working, so on and so forth. In the meantime here, we also, or you guys, developed the quarterly OKRs for the first quarter. Because we knew that when we started to, even though it's great to bring in the team and work with the team from the bottom up, you have to think about this as something that needs to be learned. And not only needs it to be learned, it also creates a ton of fear in a team typically. Because now you're raising, when you're working with the OKRs, you're raising the level of accountability. And so if you are asking people both to be masters at setting OKRs in the beginning and being in this new space and so on and so forth, you're giving them too much. It's too much of an ask. So it's important in the beginning that there is some top-down. So, but then you make sure that at least you can do things on a case by case to make sure that people will not completely discard it once you are getting started. You might do some interviews, you might do a mini session to get some input or something like that. It wasn't necessary in this instance because there was a lot to work from already, but sometimes you might need to do that.
Question?
Yeah.
How big is the innovation lab?
20, 25 people, yeah. So, but the thing is that they're doing very different things. So in that sense, it was more of a difficult task than it would if it wasn't just like a very cohesive department. So in this interim, obviously, you guys started to have a better sense about what is it really about. How easy is it? How difficult is it? Blah, blah, blah. Do we really want to do it? And Clarissa was like, yes, let's do it full on. And so then there were some conversations about the leadership system that arose. I'm going to go a little bit more into that after we've talked about this. But basically, you need to make sure that the system that you have is not working against you once you start to implement OKRs. So for instance, like you might have some meeting structures or incentives or something like that, or KPIs for that matter, that's completely disruptive. So you need to at least have some thoughts and thinking around that. But then the most important thing is that you do it properly the first time, that you take time for people to experience what it is and start working with it with a high level of support. In general, it's recommended by every quarter you have about a week to set OKRs. But because I knew how difficult this stuff is to implement, because I knew that a part of implementing this was to create some boundaries, to raise level accountability, raise ambition level, and so on and so forth, I knew there was a very high need for support in doing this. So we designed a full week, every single day, 8 to 5 or 8 to 4, where we were working with this in a workshop format, with breakout sessions and so on and so forth. So that was week 2. And that became the precursor to this quarter that we're in now. If you want to see what that week looked like, you can go on to the last page. So again, started working with mindsets and behaviors. Need to create the same foundation for the team as a whole as we did with the leadership team. Then move into OKR theory, recap, dive deeper, get into the details of it. And then the afternoon, share the yearly OKRs on an explanatory level, meaning that it's not a discussion. The OKRs for the year are like this. And yes?
Why did you choose to work with quarters?
I believe that it's we had a few conversations around it. We talked a little about it in terms of scale that's happening in the rest of the organization and so on and so forth. But there's also something around the cadence of the company in general that's in quarters. And I think it would be actually too ambitious to do it in let's say 2-month sections, because it's a lot of work to set the OKRs properly already. So, and it's much better to do it in quarters, then take time out and then learn something. Why you're not reaching them, and then have a meeting structure where you have escalation procedures that is supporting you and giving that feedback. And then as you do the circles, you become better and better at setting the OKRs. Yeah. On the Tuesday, we started with some OKR theory and then moved into a conversation around innovation culture to give some context to the team about it's not just a tool that we're using, it's also a way of thinking and working. And how can we actually use OKRs, which seems like a very dull, simple thing, to force innovation thinking. And that then became a segue into a presentation of the quarterly OKRs. But at this point now, we are starting to demand a higher level of accountability. And so at this point, we wanted to give some possibility for the team to object. So the way we did it was we presented the quarterly OKRs, and then we created what we called an objection session, where the teams had to go out and look at the objectives and come up with alternatives or feedback. And this was super tight, so we worked quite extensively, very deeply with this already, so that we knew it was like 80-90% there, and there would only be a few comments. And then we actually had to manage it in a 2-hour window afterwards and do the adjustments. Because you need to continue working with them afterwards, and it needs to be broken down after that. Then in the interim here, we were sitting as a leadership team adjusting with the feedback that came. In the afternoon on Tuesday, we talked about the OKR playing field, which is like started to talk about the boundaries. So it was like a little bit on roles, a little bit on the structure, but on a high level. Only what was needed at this point in order for them to understand that we're now going to cascade it. So enough for them to start working on team OKRs in the afternoon on Tuesday. Then that session continued on Wednesday. And on Wednesday before lunch, every team had to present, so we're working with deadlines through the week. Every team would have to come up and present what they had defined at this point. Then on Wednesday in the afternoon, we talked more deeply about the management system around it, so more deeply into what are the meetings that are going to be there. We changed some of the meetings. We changed the meeting structure from what it had been before. We made it a little bit more simple to make sure that it fitted. We say that the collective meetings that we are having are around this. Then you might have other team meetings, but they're not on a collective agenda. And then there was a kind of a brainstorming session in the afternoon on Wednesday, which is like, now we know our team OKRs, let's start to think about what needs to happen this quarter for it to happen. So it's a little bit like creating a backlog. We wanted to do this as a precursor to create individual OKRs. So we want people to have gone through this kind of thinking already. So it's just like a brainstorm, so to speak. Not like creating an actual backlog where you've defined and then that's it. On Thursday, we opened up a conversation around values and ground rules, and it's a piece of work I've been doing with Clarissa on the side to support the ambition she has around the culture. And one of the things I advised her to do is actually to be very, very slow and very, very simple about it. So she had the 10x. When we took 10x out of the vision, it was clear for the team that they felt that something was missing. So that became a value. Now we can talk about what does it mean to infuse what we're doing and infuse our thinking and our behaving and how we show up at work with 10x. So that became a value. But then on a more important note, actually, we started having something called ground rules, and that was a new thing. And that was because of the way the team had been operating before, a problem was actually that people were not showing up on time for meetings. So very laissez-faire kind of like vibe around a lot of things, because people were doing a lot of their own stuff, which actually also was affecting the team spirit and the feeling of working towards something together and being a team and so on and so forth. So I have been looking into this stuff for many years, and one of the inspirations I got was it's an American football coach. I think he's a coach for the Lakers. Can't remember his name, but he's got famous on having 3 ground rules for his team. And one of them is always be early. Not always be on time, always be early. And you can infuse that kind of thinking into everything that you are doing. What does it mean to be early with my assignment? What does it mean to be early for a meeting? And so on and so forth. And I said, let's do it real now. So we said, You will have one ground rule, always be early, and one value, 10x everything. Yeah? And so, obviously, I do a lot of work in the shadows during a week like that. And so, for instance, at some point, midway in the week, on Tuesday or something like that, I can't remember, I had given, it was kind of like there was a breakout session before lunch or something like that. And there was something around people managing their own time. They came back, I was like, we're meeting at 11:45, and usually we were meeting at 12 again. Meeting at 11:45. And people were saying, yes, I got it, yes, I got it, yes, I got it, yes, I got it. And then 11:45, only half of the team was there. 7 minutes to 12, perhaps still a third was missing. And it was actually the head of digital's team that was missing. And then I'm like, guys, you guys have a ground rule. What's up? Yeah, we heard it, and there were no accountability for each other as a team. It's like, well, go get them. Run, get them. And so you create a little bit of a drama around what they're doing, but it creates a whole other level of conversation and commitment and realness around what we are saying, what's coming out of our mouths is actually what we are doing. And no one was late at any point in time for the rest of the week. So we had a session on that in the morning, and then we started to step into working with individual OKRs. And this is where you can get a lot of resistance. And that's where it's so important that the sponsor is completely clear about this in the beginning, that you want to do this. Because people will come up with all sorts of complaints and dramatize and so on and so forth around not doing it. And so this is where leadership really, really, really comes into play. But we had made a lot of agreements before, and we were going to do it, and we're going to stick to it. And so we managed a little bit of the fear that was coming up in the room, and then people got into sessions, and they started working with it. And I remember actually, even though it's difficult, I remember both of your teams were positively surprised as we got into the process.
Can you give an example of the fear popping up in the room?
Yeah, so for instance, there was a woman in the room that started shooting down like little details on what was written in the text and stuff like that. Just right after I had said, it's important that you guys are being pragmatic about it. Right? So, and that's just a person that's just fearful about the accountability that's at the end of writing individual OKRs. And so and that's another thing. I'm working a lot with the team through a week like this in terms of bringing out care in a room and making sure that this team is ready to go into the room to hold the space for all of these things that are popping up. And you guys can give your version of it later. So we started working with the individual OKRs, and then we just shared what's the OKR software, and we used that as a way of as a deadline thing. So you needed to tap in, you needed to write into the OKR software what your OKRs were, first on a team level. So this was kind of a soft version of that deadline initially, and then there was a real deadline at noon on Friday. And then on Friday, we started talking about CFRs and learning and goals and transparency. I'm going to dive a little bit more into this after, because I've been talking a lot now, so I want to put you back to work. But and then in the end on Friday, and this is an absolutely amazing exercise, and you guys will vouch for it. And you did a second version of it, I believe, which I haven't heard a lot about. But it's what we call the stand. So, because a lot of what makes this work is that you create a culture of recognition, where people actually applaud the work that people are doing, even if they don't reach their OKRs. And so what we did was that we were sitting in a half circle, and in what I call popcorn style, everyone was coming up, sharing what their objective were, not the key results, because everyone had 4 objectives. So that would be like 48 objectives and 200 key results. So it's like, let's just do the objectives at this point. And then we had also worked in the end of the week with learning and talked about that as a part of this work. And so everyone also had a learning objective, a learning goal, which was not defined as an objective, just something I want to aspire to learn in this quarter to help me fulfill these objectives. Yeah. So that's a lot of information, and I bet you might have a lot of questions now, perhaps not, but before that, you guys have an objective. So what about we add some key results to it? Yeah, so read through the key results bit on the right side of the page that you read before. Okay. I kunne sikkert bruge resten af aftenen på det, hvis det skulle være. Yes. So I've asked Stephen and Jacob just to come up and give a little context on how they've experienced the process and what happened kind of in the different phases of actually writing the OKRs. So, like, what did they experience and learn from the beginning at Knudshoved to formulating, getting more concrete, and learning about, like, what is it actually to write good OKRs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, it is deceptively simple, and I think that was sort of also where we might have started off when we were at Knudshoved, going into a lengthy session where we talked about visions and getting the right mindset and so on, and then finally just tracking and writing them, and then coming up with the first ideas, and it's just, yeah, it's there, and Jacob being, yeah, but no. So then we did it again, and then we started actually hitting something after I think a couple of hours or something like that that we're working with, and then of course we had the first level and we took them home, but we did it again and again and again back home just to get the actual working right, because it is a very simple framework actually for using it. And that's also what our team said. This is so simple, but the details that are in what you actually put in writing, that's I think that's also something your team is experiencing a lot right now.
Definitely. I think there's a funny thing about also where we came from. Like Jacob and I are very different people. We've done a personality test that we need to do in DSP. I'm a blue person and he's a yellow person, which means that it seemed like we had also difficulties with different things about setting, defining a sentence or either an objective or a key result. I'm probably a very, detail-oriented, not very, inspired or like inspirational, where Jacob might be kind of the opposite. But I think it was just the fact of just getting something down on paper that you could talk about, because you're not going to get it right the first time, especially not when you're starting the process. And I think through this period, like what I thought was important about what I wrote down was completely wrong. And what you realize through working about these is that you kind of get your eyes open into kind of, okay, so it's actually important that it's a result and it's not an activity that you define. So because of kind of, and then you get to thinking about all the things that is possible in working towards a result and not towards an activity. But so out here, it's for me just by getting started and getting pushback from Jacob about, well, have you thought about and what does this really mean? And getting nitty-gritty about the words. Just the level of understanding and the value just increases tremendously through this period.
Yeah, it's been sort of like a roller coaster trip along the way, because then being confident that when you got presented it is easy, we got it, and then no, we don't. And then actually obtaining new knowledge along the way, and also being able to sometimes also challenge Jacob in some of the beliefs that he has, and challenge ourselves. And should we do it in this way, or should we do it in that way? And what choices do we actually make along the way? And that's just the OKR part. And there's a whole part of actually what culture do we want to bring around that. So I think it's a great journey actually being on it, and feel some epiphanies along the way.
What was the most difficult when you look at what happened before week 2 and when you look at what happened after week 2 in terms of writing and working with the OKRs?
From my point, we decided that all of our OKRs committed, so we're saying, yeah, we're going to reach them. So we sat at the Knusol, locked in a room, Stefan and Melissa and I and Jacob, and decided what we were going to reach at a yearly level. So for my part, I'm creating a service that will have 10,000 active monthly users and an NPS above 37. So that's a stretch, I'd say. So actually doing that and also saying, okay, yeah, okay, I believe we can do it. So the gap from there to actually bringing it to the team and also connecting it with the team, I think that's a huge.
And not just the service, you also put more details on like what kind of service and so on.
Criteria about it. It's within sustainability. It's about traveling. It has all these. That's what we've been massaging in the first part.
Yeah. What about the team bit? How was things with the team in the beginning and throughout, and how is it now?
I think that we are at very different places in our teams. I think you can talk in our leadership team, it has brought a lot of alignment. Like we've gotten closer together. In my team, there is like we are still in the fear stage, I would say. There's a lot of frustrations and fear around kind of what does this mean? Now I have a personal OKR and I need to reach it, but this guy over here has an effect on my OKR. What does that mean? Am I accountable for his actions now? Like all of these questions that come up. And like, so even though I can see with the team, they can't see it themselves. That's a funny thing. Like we've done this, 2 weeks now, and on the back of this week too, and productivity has just like gone through the roof. People are like running around to reach their OKRs and really taking responsibility of things that kind of always fell back on me. So yesterday I actually had a sick day, and during the day stuff like calendar invites for team things that needed to happen for us to reach our goals came in because someone was actually taking responsibility for doing it. In the past, I would have been going around either sending them out myself or poking people to do it. So it has changed a lot even already now. But the funny thing is that when I talk to the team, they can't see it. They are still in this fear mode where they don't understand why are we doing this. It was just as good before.
A lot of the things we're talking about when we're working like this is like we're talking about adult development, and you come from a place of being unconsciously incompetent to then being consciously incompetent, and then being consciously competent. And when you're operating in these phases, it's very uncomfortable to be there, and it's just like a fact of life almost. And so the worst thing you can do as a leader is to just think that it's a bad thing. It's basically because your people are hard at work at learning something new. And it's an uncomfortable place to be because we just like being comfortable in the comfort zone and being competent with what we're doing. But if you want to create extraordinary results, you need to learn new stuff. You need to change the way you operate. And so basically you need to put the working gloves on, but in a way also typically that's outside of the comfort zone. And so a big piece of the work is to create legitimacy around not being competent. And creating legitimacy around it's difficult to be in this space right now. And I can say that to other people. I find it really, really hard to be here. I get that. I also find it hard because we are stretching ourselves right now. We're needing to learn something new. Yep. What about your team, Jacob?
Yeah, they went just head in and said, okay, let's fucking do this.
Yeah.
So they looked at me and said, yeah, we can do 10,000, we can do plus 37. Okay, so definitely let's do it. And they actually they put very much into actually doing this and just wanted to actually get cracking on trying it. So during the week they were just like, enough talk, I want to get my hands dirty and actually do it. And the more they actually did it, the more they also said, okay, I can buy into this, and actually got into the details and cascaded it down through the various levels that we're using. So now we are doing it and working with it, and we can also already see some learnings. And okay, maybe we don't need super strict dates on the low-level personal goals, because actually we're still reaching our results. So it's more of we don't need as deep understanding as I think you guys do.
What has it done for the team experience? Because there's a lot that's changed in your team.
I think if you visit us before and after, you'd actually feel a whole different vibe in there, especially accountability, as you also say. A small thing, the other day one of them said, there are no celebration when I press the done OKR mark in the system. What are you going to do about it? So now we have a horn to be honked every time we do any keywords in OKR. So it's just small little things about actually taking responsibility for what you're doing, not just the site and the culture, but also actually the results that we are creating.
And you guys shared with me yesterday that I haven't been there for a couple of weeks now, and you said that you can feel it now just when you enter the room, when you enter the building, it just feels different.
We had people coming in yesterday that hadn't been there before, since before Christmas, and he was also, something's changed. So you can feel it.
Quite a remarkable thing. You have a question? Yeah.
Nice with all the commitment and the positivity. But is it legal to adjust these OKRs if you realize you're being too optimistic?
Yeah, so the way that I would go about it is that no, not for the quarter, simply for the learning of it. And because it's kind of like if you start adjusting them, you also start to create legitimacy around adjusting stuff all the time, which is not helpful actually in forcing yourself to start to think differently. Because if you create a strong container for what you're trying to achieve, then you will also start to force yourself to ask different questions. So I would bet that when people say we can't reach it, they say it way too early oftentimes. They haven't explored all the avenues. They just, basically what they're saying, I can't reach it like I'm usually reaching stuff. But that's like not a very, it's not a very ambitious way of working with it. And it's actually like, it's strictly opposite of innovation also, right? And innovation is a mindset you can have in any kind of department. It's like, how can we make this happen smarter than we did before? And not necessarily more effectively. It's the same thing as if you work with lean, and it's not like the small iterations that you're doing, it's the step changes. So I would say don't change OKRs in a quarter. Rather come out with everyone blood red, and then say what the fuck happened, and then you get better. And then it's a multitude of answers you have, right? One is we set shitty OKRs. Okay, fair enough. Let's get better at setting OKRs. The other one might be we have a really poor level of accountability. It might also be we are very bad at escalating and being accountable collectively together. So it might be that we could have succeeded if we actually worked together. So you need to create this strong container, and you need to create a container where you fail so that you can ask better questions and learn. Yeah.
We actually did have a case early on where a result was in danger of not being, so it was before we actually locked the OKR, so should we change the OKR? Mm-hmm. Actually, talking about it, we saw that, well, we hadn't explored the possibility room, so we did something else, and we actually managed to reach it, I think. Yeah. Going out of this week, so. Yeah.
And that's also why I emphasize so much working with mindsets and behaviors in the beginning, because I create these hooks that you can then have a conversation later on around this. Like, what's the premise for what's possible? And then we talk about beliefs. So stuff like that. I want to create a Q&A session in the end. Is it a key results related question?
Key result related, because you talk about the whole iterative process of continuous shaping it. Was that both the objective and the key results? Or was the objective fixed and then you worked out which key result are we going to strive for?
Or from the top level?
Yeah, what you work with in the teams, the 10,000 users and
the 10,000 users were actually fixed. We set that as a direction that we need to do. And that, as I said, that's also a bit daunting, setting that.
But that's the key result, right?
That's the key result underneath the objective. So it came with the yearly and we have the labs yearly and we have the labs quarterly. And yeah, that was what we set as fixed. And then the team said, okay, if we are to do that, what are we actually doing in the quarter? We're working towards that.
So full OKRs on yearly level, full OKRs on quarterly level, and on quarterly level, they were given the opportunity to object.
Yeah. And I would actually, we actually had a situation, and because you need to be pragmatic when you're learning this, we had a realization during when we got all the way down to the team and the personal OKRs. We actually had one where we, on a case basis, kind of chose to go back and calibrate some dates and minor details on the quarterly OKR because it didn't make sense and it would actually undermine kind of taking this whole thing seriously because we just said something like a goal that didn't make sense. So it was not that there was, we tried to have been pretty strict. But.
It's important to be to know where the non-negotiables are in this process, in this. So. And it's a good word to remind yourself about. What are the non-negotiables? The non-negotiables can be, for instance, once we've logged it, you guys logged it on the 15th of January, I think. So once it's logged, it's not opened. But when we come in with the OKRs on the yearly level in the beginning and some employee says, I've noticed something about those OKRs and it's a really valid argument, obviously you adjust it before the 15th. Right? So you get new information and you're in the process of setting them. It's not logged until the 15th. Then you have a conversation around it and you're being pragmatic. So it's about knowing where you are not willing to negotiate. We're not negotiating on not being on being early. You are being early. We're not negotiating on adjusting them once we're started. So you start to get like these few things that when I work with leaders, I call it the frame. It's like a leader's job is to know the frame and set the frame also. It's like with parents, there are certain things you don't discuss it with your children. You set the parameters. And then within that frame, we can discuss and talk about a lot of stuff. But you need to, as a leader, set the frame. And to create high performance and to create peace, psychological safety, and all these things in your team, you need to be clear about this. You need to be able to communicate clearly around it, and you need to stick to your guns, which is also a test of character when you're then being a leader. Because that might require that you get out of the comfort zone and start learning some things about how you're showing up as a leader. And all of these elements are important. And as you guys can testify, I work on all of them when I work. I've been giving you a ton of feedback on your leadership through that week, for instance. And the same thing with Clarissa. As a precursor for this, I gave her a lot of feedback on the leadership, on some of the things that might need to be adjusted and how she was showing up with these two guys. Yeah, but let's just hear... I'm actually wondering if we have a courageous person in the room who would like to share their objective and key results and get some feedback on it. Talk about it. It's an amazing opportunity to get free advisory and an objective that's going to change your life. No? Can we feel we are getting a little bit out of the comfort zone right now? Same thing as when you're working with your teams, nothing different. Exact same thing. Why all of you are not just raising your hand straight. Yes, do you want to come up? Just share it with the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mads.
How old are you, Mads?
So I work in a R&D department that has been in project mode for a while and have some teams where I'm manager that are very concentrated around project development, and they need to be transformed into having a product mindset. So my task in this coming year will be to achieve that. So I set a objective of ensuring a great transformation from project to product focus.
Ensuring a great transformation from project to
product.
From project to product focus. Okay. What does it look like once you've achieved this?
Then we have teams, so that comes a little in the key results, of course. We have teams that have each have a product that they concentrate on developing, where they know the value chain of this product, and they are independent to the most possible extent of other teams, so that they can kind of do their own DevOps, their own planning, have their own roadmaps and backlogs. So that was basically my key results.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Or I could state them as I have formulated.
State them as you have written them.
So all teams have a product. All products have a roadmap, and all teams know and then I'm a little in money stream, value stream, contribution margin, whatever. I'm kind of fishing around what is the kind of value term that I need to state here to make it measurable and tangible. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think the key results were pretty straightforward and hands-on and good, right? So, but one thing I noticed was that, first of all, you said ensure a transition. Doesn't sound exactly like a result for me.
Well,
so I'm more like, what does that transition look like once it's achieved?
So actually, I think.
Or is it more like the type of process, or like?
Yeah, I think it's because I have managers asking me to do this, right? Or that wants to get the department there, and I have the people that I need to bring there. So when I use ensure, which I actually swapped for implement, it was because the process of getting people with me there is what's important for me. I didn't like that in my key results because it's kind of hard to measure whether we could set up process around employee engagement and all that stuff, but it kind of gets not really something real.
Yeah, it's what the kind of objective you have here is one of the most tricky ones in my eyes, because even implemented can also, when you listen to the wording of it, you think about all the things you need to do to implement. As opposed to what it looks like once you've done it. So I think to support you here, when you look at the key results, think about what does it look like when you have managed this. What is in the objective? Can you read it again completely?
Ensure a great transformation from project to product.
So I would say like a great transformation. What is that? And when you're writing when I'm listening to the key results, what I'm noticing is that when you're dealing with everything, there will be a subjective perspective on what you're doing, right? And there will be an objective. There's also something that's happening on an individual level, and there's something that's happening on a collective level. I have a sense when you say your key results and you're talking about a great transformation, everything is over here. It's like, it's in the collective objective. It's stuff you can put down on a piece of paper. It's the system stuff that you have talked about. Right? And this might be because I'm biased with the work I'm doing, when I think about a great transformation, there needs to be something around what's the mindset, meaning like how are people thinking throughout, afterwards, something like that. There's something about the subjective collective. A great transformation towards this, what is required for culture? Also, what is the behavior? It's not because you need to write all of this. Perhaps what you need there is like 4 different objectives that is covering the basis so you have a great transformation. But something that's visually describing, like, is it something about, like, what does it look like? What does the culture look like while you're doing it? If it's the process that's important, you can describe that in the objective.
So,
It might be something around...
But I mean, you're quite right, because in my vision I probably see some self-organizing agile teams that, given that they have this independence, they
Independent, self-organizing teams, yeah. Great, so now I'm getting more pictures also of what is you're trying to achieve. So probably you have a little bit of a too high level objective. That's a little bit tricky because it can sound a little bit like an activity more than an actual objective. And the key results you have chosen are only in one of the core quadrants of anything you're trying to change. Yeah? Good. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to make sure there's a lot of time for Q&A, so I'm just gonna go a little bit quickly through some of the more system stuff that we work with and that are important to make this work. But first, or as a part of that, try and go to this page here, because this is the cascading structure that we created for the OKRs in the lab. So on the first level, you have yearly OKRs for the digital labs that are running throughout the year. Then there are quarterly OKRs beneath that. And once a quarter, we review and set new OKRs to meet the yearly objectives. So what is it, like how might we need to adjust and think differently and create results that can help us leverage ourselves and perhaps mitigate and manage whatever has gone wrong in the first quarter, or perhaps just stay on track and achieve what's realistic yet aggressive for the next quarter. Then this one quarter is broken down into 4 OKRs for each team. So everything that's in the blue here, everything that's in the blue is just for one quarter for 20 people. It's not even 20 people because there are more people down here, so it's even less than that. Yeah? So each team, you guys are 4 teams, have 4 OKRs. You might also just do 3, but there's something magic around 3, 4, tops 5. I like 4 because it forces you to a certain level of granularity that I find helpful. And then the teams have worked with breaking those down. Then to make this work, and I realize I'm looking in it, I see I forgot to add this page, but and you guys can help me now, but we looked at like what kind of meetings do we have? Because we wanted to create a structure, a governance basically, that could support the execution of the OKRs. And the most important thing that you need to create here are 2 things. That's a little bit. Anyway, 2 things that are really important. One thing about the structure is to make sure that it supports proper escalation. So you want to have a cadence and a fora, or fora in plural, that has escalation in the right amount at the right times. I'm going to write in a second what kind of meetings that we have. The second thing that are really important for this governance structure is also that it facilitates learning. Because learning is like the magic powder of OKRs. It's like if you don't have learning as a part of the culture, just don't bother. Don't bother the process of setting really good OKRs, at least just set some goals and get on with it. So the meetings that we have are we have the team retro. Yeah, the team retro is once every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every Tuesday.
Yeah, which is basically people have their individual OKRs, so it's a possibility to escalate like I can see already now there's some problems in the horizon for my OKRs, and I then can escalate it on the team retro. So it's not like a traditional retro. It's kind of more like we're looking back at seeing how are things going for the week. Then you have
Lab stand-up.
You have lab stand-up, which is basically a similar version of the team retro. Some of these, I think there's some legacy in some of these names also, not to create too much change when we are doing this. But the lab stand-up is a similar version. So now the team leads show up for the meeting. Everyone show up. It's an all hands meetings, but the team leads or OKR leads, as we decided
We decide on each time who actually brings it forth. So it's a team.
Okay, so you've done even better. Someone is given the responsibility each time to bring forth the escalations that are happening in each team. Then we have
Lead meetup.
Which one? Lead meetup. Which is for you guys and Clarissa and a third person to meet up and discuss how things are going across the teams.
Yeah, something that's handled in the lab stand-up. That's the next escalation point.
Yeah. So or handling what comes up in this. So this is basically where these are like 15-minute meetings weekly. This is an hour meeting, right?
30 minutes. Actually.
30 minutes. Okay, you guys are quick. That's good. But it's basically a problem-solving meeting. Then we have
an OKR steering group meeting,
which is an implementation. This is a temporary meeting.
Yeah, it's for keeping things separate. So in the lead meeting, we're not talking about the implementation of this framework. This is what we talk about here, not problem solving.
Yeah. Monthly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we have our lab huddles.
Yes.
Our one-to-ones.
Yeah. So one-to-ones, which is held by the OKR leads or team leads, so to speak, with team members, where the focus is solely learning and supporting the person in whatever support they need in achieving what they want to achieve. And then you have
lab huddles.
Lab huddles, which is sharing, celebration, learning, so on and so forth. And
quarterly sessions.
Yes. Quarterly sessions, which is the 1 week thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically similar to the one we discussed earlier today.
And up to that innovation days.
Yeah.
2 set days.
Innovation days. Which is kind of like creating a different kind of brainstorming that can then feed into that week. Yeah, which is 2 full days prior to that week. But there's a week every cycle. As you get better, it's not necessarily a full scheduled week, but it happens over a week. And I would propose that in the beginning, when you're implementing, I would say perhaps even the first full year, you keep it quite tight. Because it's also a forum to not only just manage and set the OKRs, but to create a conversation in the team and create language around how things are going. So it's a very culture building format. So that it's something that you probably also need to not just have a structure for, like a 2-day PI planning session or something like that. It's something that you facilitate a little bit more like a workshop. And you make sure that you, perhaps in the one-on-ones and so on and so forth, you start to notice that there are patterns that are happening in the team. So you can use that week also to create some sessions around that, so that you are learning as a full team and not just bilaterally. Yep. So, and then we created in order to make sure that there was some clarity around mandate, we also created that there would be an OKR lead, and we had a very specific description of it. Actually, Jacob has taken the workbook that we used for the week with him, and you feel free. I'm just going to send it around in a second, and you can look at it. But there was a very tight description of what is a good OKR lead, what is a bad OKR lead, what are the responsibilities of the OKR lead. You want to kind of like draw it out a little bit because it's a role description that should facilitate behavior. And what am I missing in the structure bit?
I think one of the things was that we had, there's an escalation, but we had this informal leadership structure where Jakob and I had each of our teams. And I think, at least from my perspective, what we did with this conversation was also flatten it a bit.
Yeah.
So actually flatten the hierarchy. So, because that would enable a more shared responsibility.
Yeah.
And then stated that what we had is kind of, we're more like just making sure that there's order around our team OKRs and the process.
Yeah. You guys had a lot of functional leads for different things, which, because people are so attached to titles, it didn't actually mean anything in praxis, but it meant a lot of things in terms of the noise that it was creating. So people now still have their functional leads, their functional roles or titles, but they have come to mean less, because it's like, yes, you are this, and you can put it on your LinkedIn profile and so on and so forth. But and you might have a functional, speciality stuff you know more about than other people. But it's more like now you're the go-to person within this. It's not like you have to make a lot of decisions for everybody around this stuff. So that kind of like made things a lot easier, and perhaps also facilitated you guys coming together as a team much more. And then finally, there's the escalation. There are two kinds of escalations. Also very important to anyone. I haven't been very inclusive in my conversation today. What two types of escalations might there be? There's not a lot of air in here.
I think it can be people escalations.
Yes.
And it can be priority escalations.
Yes. So yes, it's actually correct. I just have a little bit of a different way of framing it. So, just to create clarity around it, we say that there are OKR escalations, which is like OKRs at risk. And then there are conflict escalations, which is basically about disagreement. What I'm working hard to do, also when I'm in a team like this, is to take the mom and dad element out of leadership. Which is basically people complaining to their bosses about other people. And then the person going, oh, what should I do? Then the leader starts to coach the individual on it, perhaps even try to go out and fix it for them. It's a super unhealthy thing to have in a team. It's a super, super unhealthy thing. What you want to do instead as a leader is you want to work with the team to create an environment where people are capable of solving the problems themselves. With each other. Everyone's adults in this game. So one of the ways is that I worked with this element of crucial conversations in the beginning, which actually gives people some tools to have these difficult conversations. Because sometimes people are not doing this because they're actually incompetent at having these difficult conversations. And so that's the leader's job, is to make sure that we are supporting people in learning whatever they need to learn to be powerful and impactful and take ownership for whatever's not working. But the other thing is that there is a process for escalation that is so difficult that you really gotta mean it before you do it. On the disagreement bit, not on the OKR bit, but on the disagreement bit. So it's like if you are disagreeing, I'm not gonna dive into it very specifically. You can see it in the workbook if you look at it. But it's basically you have to parties have to come together, write down what the disagreement is, clarify what alternatives are, so on and so forth. write it down, bring it forth, have people meet together, 3 parties, all of this stuff. Classic mediation stuff. But it forces people to raise the level of accountability. And so now you have the ability to have difficult conversations. You have a strong container with OKRs, which is creating conflicts. And you have structures to support that things are flowing to the right places at the right time. And then that will support the right behavior. At least if you then have leaders who make sure that they keep working at it. Yeah? So I think I want to leave it at this and open for the more broad conversation because we have 15 minutes left and then we can dive into more detailed questions. Yes? Okay. Good. You have
Is there an approval process for the objectives and key results? Like, do they have to be clear with whoever said that?
On a higher level?
Yeah. Like, who ensures alignment?
Yeah. So for this, Clarissa, the head of digital, we created the OKRs for the yearly level, which is same like saying what do we want to do in this department for the next year. And then she went. She has an advisory board that she needs to speak to, and unfortunately wasn't able to have them meet before. So she just went on a one-on-one trip with everyone, yeah, and got feedback on them and so on and so forth. And then she's also the only one who has remuneration based on or bonuses or whatever you want to say. Result targets, basically, based on what's happening in the department. So she's found a way to, with her boss, to translate these OKRs into what she's being measured at. Yeah? What else? Yes?
I just felt like it actually goes on because then she owns the OKRs, right?
Yes, so, a good point.
So she would approve the team's contribution,
good point.
Come with the suggestions,
yes,
and she would approve that we as a collective, like all the teams, covered her OKRs,
yeah,
and then basically us as leads actually had that role on the personal level.
Yeah, good detail. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, how do you see the personal OKRs compare with the personal development plans you as a people manager typically will work up with your employee?
Great question. So what the initial discussions that we had was that they obviously everyone also has some kind of development plan. We talked about defining like 8 topics that were connected to that format that was just given by DSB that they had already, and then people could kind of develop a personal goal that fitted that. But in the end, we were like, it's too much. It's not necessary to be rigorous, at least in this specific case like that. And so they just developed a goal that they thought was befitting. And what I would prefer and what I emphasize also is that these goals are more on the personal side. So how are you communicating? How are you talking to people? Like, how are you impacting stakeholders? All of this kind of stuff that has something to do with you, how you are showing up. Because it's a much bigger problem than technical skills usually. But because the team was being foie gras things for a week, we didn't ask that. So we basically just like figure out a goal that you feel you want to commit to, because it's kind of they're already being so stretched at this point. And then we might up the ante a little bit for the next session.
So I admit it, probably in the ideal world then, as I see it, the personal OKRs would actually replace your personal development plans.
No, actually, that's a good question. Hang on, I forgot this bit. 100% no. Or at least in some way, no. And here's why. Within the OKR world, there's something called CFRs, which stands for conversations, feedback, and recognition. To make OKRs work, we need to create flexibility in the system where there's also accountability. Did you know this already? You're just trying to prime it out? Okay. And so typically all of these, what you're talking about, like the personal development plan, my goals, what I'm being held up on, like all of these things, they just lie in like this one big mess of things. And everything is just on one evaluation form of some sort, right?
It depends on the type of manager, right?
You get the picture I'm pointing. What you want to try and do is that you want to try and weave it out so that you have something around evaluation. This is basically performance management, right? You have something around feedback and like CFRs basically. And then you have the OKRs. The reason why you want to do this is because what happens if I start failing on my OKRs? Is it always my fault 100% if I fail on my OKRs? No. There are circumstances that can happen, right? And these circumstances impact us as a team also. So every time an individual is failing on OKRs, we need to look at it. The individual needs to figure out, what am I not seeing and learning here that's affecting my ability? Might it be the writing of the OKR? Might it be my way of, am I not having conversations I need to have with stakeholders? Whatever, all of that stuff. But it might also be something else. But now we are in red as a team on our main OKRs, because that individual OKR was a piece of the puzzle. And so now you need to make strategic decisions as a team. So you need to escalate, and then you need to figure out, well, perhaps this particular OKR, one of the reasons why it wasn't met and the person escalated was because it's a super tricky one. But it's a key component of what we're trying to achieve this year. Then you need to be able to take another person on the team who will now fail on their OKRs and reshuffle resources over there. If then that person is being measured against that his or her own OKRs, you won't be able to reshuffle. That's one thing. The second thing is, because world and life also affects our OKRs, people might have read OKRs but having done a really good job. And if they're being measured against it, it kind of like takes all the air out of it. So if you want this culture of accountability and recognition and so on and so forth, you need to have the culture carry the behavior and the commitment and the accountability, and not some arbitrary bonus sort of thing or measuring against goals. And the funny thing about this also, which is just, it's so hard to grasp, but like all research also tells us that kind of stuff just doesn't work. As soon as a task is more complicated than moving this thing from here, this brick from over here to over here, as soon as complexity increases, when you increase bonuses, it decreases performance. And it's like kind of like this completely. So it's like more complex task, smaller bonus to make sure that people perform the best. And like the world we live in today, everything's complex. It's just a version of complex. So it's like if you can use this as a lever to get out of those kinds of classic corporate schemes that aren't really working, it's going to support your productivity and performance. And once you've proven that, you might also say, can we please not have this, because it's actually not supporting us very much. Yeah. What else questions? Yeah.
I'm a little confused maybe on this case we have today, or in general on sustainability versus organizational transformation. So it sounds very much as we are in a phase here in this case with using this tool as an organizational transformation tool, cultural transformation tool. And then you kind of get all into a lot of stuff and running heavily here on the third week of the project. But what about a year from now? And what about the next year? And so how do you keep up without overdoing it? Because people could easily grow tired, or it becomes everyday life at some point, right?
Yeah, it definitely needs to become everyday life. Because everyday life is a new normal, which means that we just raised our level of being able to perform at a much higher level. But then it's up to leadership to create stretch through more ambitious OKRs and just look at how can we, demand more of the conversations that we're not having right now, or whatever. It's basically just a leadership task like anything else, like a normal business. But I think it's something that any leader would need to keep their eye on. And I think oftentimes when air is like taken out of an initiative or something like this, it's because it's actually not being put into the organization. It's kind of like this thing that we're doing. It's kind of like on top of everything else and so on and so forth. And it's basically just another flavor of the month. But if you do it right, and which means that you need to think about it holistically and systematically, as we've been sharing today, and you have leaders who also keep looking at themselves and take ownership for what is it I need to learn as a leader here, then I don't think that will be a problem at all, actually. Yeah. And if you're challenged, we'll talk afterwards. Yes?
I was wondering about how do you create transparency in this? Do you use physical goals, or how do you...
Great question.
I have another question.
Yes, attached question. Bring it on.
This seems like a very comprehensive rollout.
Yes.
For 20 people.
Yes.
I'm in an organization of 30,000 people.
Yes.
And I simply cannot see it.
Yes.
Like that. So do you have a cost benefit when you start? This is maybe for the DSV, digital people. Or how do you know if this is actually...
Like the business case?
Yeah.
Or is that what you mean by cost benefit?
Do you have OKRs for your implementation?
Not at this point, because I would say focus on what matters. And the matters what the results, and then you learn around them. I think it's important to keep it simple and not trying to, and even though it might not even seem simple with the way that we have done it, it's still a simple version. It's just that there's so many pieces that you need to do to make it work. But it's just like any other transformation. And it's like what I've seen. And the thing is, you need to understand that it's an investment, but you need to go slow to go fast. And I bet with the big investment that we have done here, these guys will be tenfold than what if we had done a light version now and then done a little bit more of a light version later, and so on and so forth. So, but if it's a bigger transformation, and we had the scalability conversation before, I would start every time when I talk about transformation in companies, and I talk with leaders and I want to do something, I say we need to figure out some kind of closed loop system. It might be an area, like a location, that's a closed loop system. It might be a department or something like that. But you need to figure out where there is a light coupling to the other systems. So there's a natural kind of it's typically there will be a subculture of some sorts within a closed loop system, within an organization, or at least a loosely coupled system. And then you kind of define that as a scope, and then you start there. And then you succeed to some extent there, right? So, and if, for instance, if it's a big organization that might be doing scale, so you might work with OKRs like this in one of the trains, for instance. Or you could work in all of them, it just takes up more capacity. So you just need a bigger team to support the rollout. But another thing I said with working with mindsets and behaviors before, if I do real culture transformation, I have a 7-day program that I run with, which is 3 days on leading self. Then it's 2 days on leading others. And then it's 2 days on leading transformation or leading systems. And it's not those kinds of, I've been trained in the US, it's not like a the classical kind of transformation. It's like you really actually go deep in these conversations. And then what you do is like on a very shortly, right? But you take a cadre of change agents, which is typically the troublemakers within the organization. People whose energy takes up more than their formal role. So people that other people listen to at the coffee machine. And then you build transformation competency with a leadership team, the extended leadership team, and a cadre of these transformation agents before you do anything on a systems implementation side at all. You build this kind of competency, and then you have a language and a possibility to have a different kind of conversation than you normally have. And then you can roll out in a bigger system at once. And I've done this when you rolled out like for 3,000 people at once, for instance. But then you start there. And then a transformation like that, which typically otherwise would take perhaps like 5 to 7 years or something like that, you can get it down to 12 to 18 months. But you need to understand, you need to create this investment up front first, where you build a higher level of higher quality of conversation, and you actually build accountability and so on and so forth into the system first, and work with trust and stuff like that. And then after this, you have it's not like things don't need to be pushed through anymore. Then you can create an architecture session where people run with it much more themselves. But this is actually the leadership setting a lot of the frames also. We are over time. I can stay and answer questions if you want.
He also asked about transparency.
Yes. So what we've used the GTM Hub, I think it's called. It's a piece of software. It's actually quite a lot of software. Also, if you look, if you're a bigger organization, HCM systems, a lot of those also have actual OKR tools built in. It's just that no one knows about them, but they are there. So sometimes if you have a SAP system of some sorts, sometimes you can actually find a component there that supports working with OKRs.
I actually want to add one thing. We also did it physical, so you could actually see the cascade when you go around the office.
Okay, so you also done it physically.
And you can see from each office what they're working on down to the actual.
So it's visible on the walls. You don't have to go to the system.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Before we leave, I think I think we have to stop now.
Yes.
Last week we decided to use OKRs in our own company. We have 5 people. But I think that we are in for some kind of trouble, at least a lot of discussion around, because I think what Jacob has shown here today is it's simple, but it's not easy, right? So thank you a lot, Jacob, for sharing the experience. And also